Hello, friend. This is Ryan Hicks of TalkToProfit.com, and today I want to talk about how sometimes people can be seeking the truth, but it turns into slander against God. I've seen this happen so many times, and people are not intending to do this. Their intention is not to blaspheme God, but it's the end result of what they do. And religion is full of this. The religion of the world are full of blasphemies for God. They blame God for bad weather. They blame God for a child dying. They blame God for a family of 4 being killed by a drunk driver in a car wreck. They blame God for all kinds of evils in the world. But the reason they're doing is not necessarily to slander God, especially if they're professing Christians. They're not trying to slander God, but it's the end result. It's the end result of not having a deep union with God, where you're so in tune with the divine that you understand him. You start to think like him. You know, it's very interesting. People will run to like Isaiah chapter 55, where it says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." And they use this as a justification for foolishness, folly, for believing ignorantly, for thinking they can't understand the deeper things of God. But they ignore 100% the context. God's not talking to a saint there. God's not talking to a child of God there. The verse right before that passage says, "Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and let him return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy upon him, and to our God, and for he will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts." So see, whose thoughts? The unrighteous man's thoughts. Whose ways? The wicked man's ways. When you get in tune with God, you're his child. He lets you in on his ways. He lets you in on his thoughts. He gives you his thoughts. You can understand deeper things of God. You don't have to be this person flailing around in the darkness, blindly scraping, trying to find some truth, and you find it in the traditions of men that blaspheme God, that literally are speaking slander against the Almighty. And so what happens is bad experiences happen in people's lives because they don't understand the nature of reality. They don't understand how to operate within the reality to get the best results possible. They naturally conclude it must be God that's at fault. It must be God who's responsible for these things. Maybe God didn't do it directly, but he allowed it to happen. So in the end, God gets the blame for it. The devil gets the glory because he's somehow in the mix, but he's just doing what God wanted him to do anyway, in their minds. People are legitimately trying to find truth. They're trying to find out, why did certain things happen? But instead of getting into the deeper things of God and realizing why things happen, which, here's a spoiler alert, it's because of them. It's because of the choices they've made. It's because they haven't stepped out into the dominion God gave them. They haven't stepped out in the power of God and operated by faith in God via the faith of God. They've created a whole life for them that is not exactly what they want. And instead of realizing how to get out of that and operate the way God wants you to, living a life of heaven on earth, they fall back to this carnal notion of blaming God for it. And they're trying to understand. They're trying to understand how things work. They're trying to understand, well, why does this bad thing happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? Been books written about that with nonsense conclusions. Bad things happen to good people, quite frankly, because sometimes good people do foolish things. They're not evil. They're not out sinning and doing all kinds of vile acts, but they're ignorant of the deeper things of God. We saw this in the book of Job. Everybody reads that and they get some weird conclusion from it as exact opposite of what's being taught. Job was a righteous man. He was a good man, what we would call today. But he was living in great fear. He said, "What I've greatly feared has come upon me." So he didn't have all this knowledge that he could have had. And it wasn't because he was evil. He just didn't know. Now we today know better. And yet people today are still choosing to go back to the old ways and blame God for things. If there are events in your life you're trying to understand, why did this happen? You don't have to make up things like, well, you know, it happened so I can learn a lesson, or it must have been God's will, or whatever foolishness that literally is slandering God. Instead, you can realize what Jesus taught. He taught you to have faith in God. First and foremost, you do that, you get rid of the fear that comes with the world. Because fear is legitimately faith in the devil. But your faith is in God, what are you going to be afraid of? Who are you going to fear? You're not going to fear any man. You're going to fear any circumstance. And you're going to start to realize that circumstances are a product of you and your heart. Those imaginations you have in your heart, that is producing the reality you're experiencing. That's what Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 is plainly teaching. And remember, Jesus is walking and he goes to a fig tree and he expects to find figs on it, and there's none there. And he says, no man shall eat fruit from you thereafter. And they come back later and the fig tree is dried up from the roots. The disciples are marveling. And Jesus doesn't tell them, well, if you pray long enough, then maybe you can have this kind of faith. He doesn't say anything like that. He says, have faith in God. For whosoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed, and be thou cast in the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe those things he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith. He taught you what's going on in this world. He didn't teach you to go blame God for it. Well, God must have cursed that tree. God must have wanted that fig tree to die. He taught you faith in God. He taught you how to act. He taught you what is going on in this world and how to experience the world the way God has intended it for you. If you keep living like the masses of men, their lives of quiet desperation, their lives of head in the sand, not knowing what's going on, just randomly existing, and just whatever happens, they take it as some sort of divine decree for them, you're going to have a rough life. And even as good as your life may possibly get, it would have been 100 times better had you known the truth and operated by the faith of God, doing things the way God wants you to do them. You can have a glorious life, my friend. What you've experienced in the past is in the past. Dredging it up and wondering, why did this happen or that? Unless you're learning some lesson from it legitimately and actually saying, okay, here's the lesson I learned from this. I made bad choices. I spoke bad things. I believed bad things. I thought a negative way. I got a bad result, and I'm going to change my ways. I'm going to get into that person who has cast off his unrighteous man thoughts, who has forsaken his wicked ways, and I'm going to know God's thoughts, and I'm going to know his ways, and I'm going to walk in them, and I'm going to think like he thinks, and I'm going to speak like he speaks, and I'm going to get the results that he wants me to have. My friend, you can have a great life, or you can choose to be like everyone else, choose to be like the vast majority of men who blame their bad results on God. The ones that get a little more religious blame it on the devil. Most of those people, whether they blame God or blame the devil, also blame their spouse or their boss or their children or whatever. The excuses are endless, but when you are walking in the deeper path of God, walking in that deep, bold faith, you realize that you decree the life you want. You experience the life that you have created within your heart, in your imagination, and you start to have the best results in life. Because you're no longer a victim of time and chance. You're no longer a victim of the world. You're no longer a victim of the devil. The devil can't even touch you, as 1 John chapter 5, verse 18 says. And you start to live that life of heaven on earth that Jesus taught his disciples to pray for. My friend, I pray this is a blessing for you. May God bless you richly.